You are listening to Demystifying Organizations. In partnership with McGraw-Hill Education, I'm your host, Jeff Shatton. My guest today is Roger Martin. Roger was named the world's #1 management thinker by Thinkers 50, a biannual ranking of the most influential global business thinkers. Roger serves as the Institute Director of the Martin Prosperity Institute and the Michael Lee Chin Family Institute for Corporate Citizenship at the Rotman School of Management. From 1998 to 2013, he served as Dean. In 2013, he was named Global Dean of the Year by the leading business school website Poets and Quants. He has published 11 books, the most recent of which are Creating Great Choices, Getting Beyond Better, and Playing to Win, which won the award for Best Book of 2012 to 2013 by Thinkers 50. He has written 25 Harvard Business Review articles. Roger is a trusted strategy advisor to the CEOs of companies worldwide, including Procter & Gamble, Lego, and Verizon. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Roger Martin. Thanks so much for joining me on.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
It's an honor to have you on this podcast. You have just such a wide range of writing and thoughts on so many different topics. And we're going to kind of center our discussion today on the role of business in society, strategy, broadly speaking, and some of the maybe moves and fallacies that are done within the strategic process. Many companies draw up lofty missions. We tend to see that where they don't really ring true to customers. For example, I just pulled up a couple. Starbucks is to inspire and nurture the human spirit. JetBlue is to inspire humanity. So one, I was wondering what you think about some of the trends in corporate communication to throw out these lofty missions, and is it problematic to have a mission that is distant from the customer experience? And then how do you go about coming up with an appropriate mission?
I think you've landed on exactly the critique I would have of those. I think in some sense it's hard to argue that they're nice, positive sounding missions. But my most beloved academic mentor was the late Chris Argyris, and he drew a distinction between espoused theory and theory in use. And he said people tend to have lofty espoused theories. I will be a good person and honest and truthful, etc. And corporations can have espoused visions like the ones you've talked about. But he said it doesn't really matter. What matters is their theory in action. What they actually do is in fact their true theory. And I think when you have such an abstract one, you're a budget airline and your job is to enhance humanity, hard to connect that with what you do on a daily basis and how your customers think of you. And again, JetBlue and Starbucks have both laudable strategies and are good companies. But I would rather have something that is more connected to what they actually do and how the customer actually experiences them.
Should a mission be aspirational?
It should be aspirational, but tied enough with what you actually do that it is not a joke, right? If it's aspirational, but everybody says what you do versus that aspiration is such a gap that I think it's silly, then it's actually worse than nothing, because then the employees and customers will tend to think you're being disingenuous. You say that, but since what you do is so at odds with it, that I think you're just sort of making that up to make yourself feel good. So I don't trust you. There's got to be enough of a connection.
In your book about on Procter & Gamble, you write that companies must play to win, not to participate. It's on your co-authored book. Is this unique to the United States or to other market-based economies? How do you think of strategy in this play-to-win atmosphere in places like China or Russia, or places where the state plays a role, and maybe tie that into how you see the United States moving forward in a play-to-win atmosphere?
Well, I think it applies everywhere, and if you don't think Chinese companies are playing to win, then
Mhm.
maybe you haven't hung around with Chinese companies enough. If not, if not on average, the most fiercely competitive companies on the planet. So I think why I say you've got to play to win is you've got to play to be attempting to achieve for the customers you're serving the best value equation in the market. And that will make, in my view, their lives better, and is the only way that you have at least a good chance of perpetuating yourself as a company. Now, that doesn't mean playing to destroy other competitors, right? That's sort of the logical fallacy. All it means is that for the set of customers you're serving, you're trying to serve them better, and lots of other companies can survive and prosper in proximity to you, because there are lots of segments of customers to solve in any business in various different ways. Just don't, it's no use playing to replicate somebody else, to say, I'm going to try and serve their customers approximately as well as them.
So you'd move out of the business as a gladiator sport mindset.
Exactly. Business is a place where you need to pick very carefully where to play, where you can add unique value in that domain. So it's not going head to head. In fact, going head to head with somebody else is probably not good for anybody. It's figuring out how to declare. You kind of declare to competitors, right? Would be competitors. This is the territory where I'm going to focus my energy and resources on. And I'm going to focus my energy and resources on that territory in a way that I would like the customers in it to think of me as their best alternative. Yeah, so it's more about trying to slide your competitors in one territory, in one direction, right? Encouraging them to play differently than you for a different set of customers, and for you to say, for a set of customers that has this set of needs, I'm going to be the absolutely best at serving.
So you see the competitive landscape almost what I would consider as being a gentleman's sport, where it's not trying to destroy the competition. I think really you said it in what I would consider the idealized version of capitalism in America. And what I'm wondering is how do you make sense of, or what do you think of things like Microsoft in the 80s and 90s, which was really to just wipe out everybody else? Or I can think of a lot of the tech firms of today, where even if it's not overt anti-competitive practices, much of the maneuvers are done that will effectively wipe out all competition. Where do you stand from, I guess, going from the Procter and Gamble model, which is setting up your product in a position that will work in competition with your peers, but not to destroy them, versus some of the other cases that we can think of?
Yeah, I do think that there are a bunch of people out there in executive offices who have the gladiatorial view of competition, and killing your competitors, machine gunning them on the beaches is what you should do. I don't think it's actually in their long term interests. Right? I think that having competitors in the world of competition I see, which is partially overlapping Venn diagrams, right? Where this is my territory, this is your territory. Yes, we have border skirmishes because there are customers in between who are more indifferent between the two. They don't easily segment into mine versus yours. I think having to serve those customers teaches you what they want and how to serve them better. If you've got a monopoly, they simply have to use you, and you don't get trained on a daily basis. See, lots about competition is going to the gym, and your customers train you. Your customers say, I don't really like that much. And then you can be like pissed off at them and say, why are they so miserable? But you go back and say, how can I make this better for them? I mean, it is arguable that, since Windows 95, which was truly a breakthrough, thanks to Microsoft licensing the graphical user interface from Apple and having your computer work with a mouse, not with keystrokes, was the last Microsoft edition that people actually celebrated coming out. Like, do you remember if you had an IT department then telling you needed to upgrade to whatever Microsoft 7 or what the heck was it called? Get the name? Or
Windows 7.
Yeah, Windows 7, but then there was another one with a name, which I'm now forgetting. And you're like shuddering and saying, no, I just have to learn about stuff, and it ain't going to be a tiny bit better than previous. Well, that's what you get from monopoly, I think. You see to go to the gym.
Yeah, I think along the lines of Microsoft, there's a famous story of where Bill Gates gets a hold, or it was Ballmer Gates gets a hold of the first iPhone, and it's just they're taking it apart and just trying to figure out what is this thing, what have they done, and yeah, it elevates the playing field. So it makes the people that are behind have to figure out a way to provide a better service or product for the customer.
Yes, I think so. And so this whole, is it good for Facebook to have Instagram eliminate from existence Snapchat, which they're clearly trying to do, right? They would like to eliminate them from existence. Will that actually be good for them? My answer is no. I think it will feel good in the short term, but then they will, they've learned from Snapchat a bunch of things that they've never figured out without Snapchat that customers like. And now they're just ripping them all off and using their immense financial power to attempt to kill Snapchat. But I honestly don't think from a long-term health of Instagram or Facebook that is a great idea.
It's an interesting perspective, because usually you think of that it's in the company's best interest to wipe out all competition and be able to raise prices, or for Facebook that'd be have higher prices for advertisers, but the consumer is hurt at the expense of the company. And what you're saying is that the company itself is also worse off.
I think so, right? I mean, I think that unless, like, this is like an athlete who says, now that I've won the championship, I never have to work out anymore. Never.
Right.
Like ever. And I think, a great athlete could probably win the next year's, championship, or win the next 5 races because they're so good. But how about 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line? How about the next 20 races? I think if you stop working out, you get crappy pretty fast. So I think for any company, there's an optimal amount of competition, right? If you have what economists would think of as perfect competition with, kind of a million equally endowed competitors duking it out in the market, I don't think you have enough managerial freedom and surplus kind of earnings to invest in creating the future. So that's not good for the future, for future customers or the future of the companies. And monopoly is not good for future of the customers or future of the companies. And some amount of competition that causes you to work out every day is the optimal amount of competition from my standpoint. It's societally optimal, it's optimal for the company and optimal for the customers. And I think in the tech world, with kind of the strength of network effects and the attitude in much of the tech world, we've gone too far to one end of that, and it's not good for them, for society, or for customers.
So you write about executive compensation, which is often tied to stock price. And in the traditional MBA classroom, shareholder and stock price is king. And pretty much almost universally in a corporate finance class, you're going to cover that the role of a company is to add value to its shareholders. The way that it does it is through customers, but the end purpose is shareholder value. And then going down that causal chain, executive compensation is often tied, or at least the stock options, directly to stock prices. So I wanted to get your kind of perspective on this and your critique of that system.
Oh, it's one of the dumber ideas in all of business, I guess. Is that clear enough?
Yeah, no, I would agree. But I was going to kind of lay out at least what I see as the traditional perspective.
Yeah, no, I know you are. Yes. It's just one of the great logical fallacies of business. And the reason is that a stock price is not something that's kind of, if you will, real. It's very ethereal. A stock price is simply the cumulative view of the future prospects of the company, of all those actively in the market for that kind of equity.
Well, I want to add a little bit to the craziness, right? Which is, that's true, but it's also highly dependent on things like interest rates and inflation and these items that are completely irrelevant to a given company. Right. And so you can have, right? I mean, if you think about it, right? If Jerome Powell comes out today and announces a rate cut, then all of a sudden Apple is going to be worth a lot more, completely separate from Tim Cook or anything that the company has done.
Oh, absolutely. Or if you're the CEO of an oil company, right? If the way to make the highest level of personal compensation for an oil company CEO is to happen to get appointed a day when oil prices are relatively low and retire when oil prices are relatively high. Nothing else you do at all will come anywhere close to having the impact that will on your compensation and the view of you as a successful oil company CEO. So there's a whole bunch of things that go into it, but essentially what it means is that you will make good earnings on your stock-based compensation to the extent not that you have the company do better than it was doing before the day you became CEO. That does not increase the value of your stock-based compensation. Your stock-based compensation only improves in value to the extent that people's expectations of future performance of the company rise over their expectations today. So the hardest way to make expectations rise is to actually make the company's prospects better. That takes a whole lot of hard work. A much easier way to make expectations rise is for you to hype your stock, make sort of exaggerated predictions about the future, buy another company that you then amortize the acquisition costs of, so that your your earnings look good in the short term. Engage in shady accounting. All of those things actually are much easier to do than to actually make your company better. And in fact, if you're really, really, really clever as a CEO, like the cleverest CEOs on enhancing their stock-based compensation, the minute they become CEO, they declare things are way worse than they or anybody else thought, so that they drive their stock price down, then make sure it stays down until their next tranche of stock-based compensation is given out. So it's given out at a nice low level, and then get the stock price back to the original level it was at when you took over as CEO. That'll make you rich. Right?
Right.
So if you can take over a company with a stock price of 100, you can badmouth it to get it down to 60. And while it's down there, do a bunch of things that you wouldn't have done at 100, but you can do at 60.
Stock repurchases.
Will drive it back to 60, right? Then you'll be rich, because your stock options that you got at 60 will be worth a fortune at 100, and you've done nothing for the shareholders, but you have engaged in the thing that is most important to your compensation, which is to be a sophisticated manipulator of expectations, not a sophisticated runner of the competitiveness of the company. And that's what stock-based compensation has done.
So I'm just going to put on the hat of the person who would defend the traditional system, which maybe the thinking would be along the following lines. Well, that might be true, but CEO tenures tend to be 5-7 years, and all the shenanigans can only go on for so long. And that if in 7 years there's a big difference between a stock that has quadrupled versus one that's been cut in half, you might have some crazy accounting schemes that affect things along the edges. But there's fundamentally a difference between a company that quadruples in size over a 7-year period.
I'd say, for starters, where are you getting your lame-o statistics from? The CEO tenure is now 3 to 5 years, and no CEO that I'm aware of can take a company that would have otherwise not been quadrupling their earnings and actually quadruple them in 5 years. So you're talking about a hypothetical situation that is never going to occur. And in fact, you will still have the greatest incentive of that person to, in their final year, do a bunch of things that were very bad for the company long term, that look good in the short term, so that they can exit on a high. What was the highest price of General Electric stock in its entire history? What day did that happen to be?
I'm gonna venture. I'll throw out a guess.
Yeah.
Probably 2000, something like that.
Yeah, but what event occurred on the same day?
Market peak.
No.
.com peak. No. Okay.
Jack Welch retiring.
Okay. Sure.
Right? Was that a coincidence?
I'm gonna say no. He's our one of our top executives ever.
Yeah, right. It's let's organize this thing, and you can see it with executive after executive. Why do so many high flying companies kind of crash? The stock prices crash after a switch in CEO. Right.
It's gonna be connected to future expectations and how that changes, which we see with some of the worry about Buffett and Munger going out of Berkshire.
Yeah, although there's going to be a legitimate one. If you have a worse CEO coming in, that's legitimate, right? But what I'm talking about is CEOs who, to have that last flourish that's going to make them the last couple $100 million in the valuation of their stock-based compensation, will engage in the good-sounding acquisition that you paid too much for that never will pay off, but for the first year looks like a winner, right? You'll do that. like Coca-Cola did leading up to Roberto Guazetta's untimely demise. There was a series of acquisitions to pump up the stock so that he became the first billionaire in the world who was not either the founder or the guy who took public his company.
Right. So it's one of the costs of empire building, right? So executives have private incentives often to go through acquisitions that probably will not pay off for shareholders, probably not pay off for consumers, but can often lead to higher executive compensation.
That is correct. And what's not understood well enough is when that happens, they time to perfection, right? Yeah. They have an idea when I'm going to retire and when my stock-based compensation vests, and I crystallize it, and I'm going to hit that crescendo perfectly, just perfectly. And again, it's legal, right? It's like,
sure.
And again, what you have to remember is that if that there's a moral aspect to incentive compensation, right? So if I say to you, hey, here's the deal. I want you to sell twice as much next year as you sold this year. And I'm going to give you an incentive, which is a balloon payment if you hit twice the sales of this year. That's really meaningful to you. It's a $500,000 incentive. If you say to yourself, I don't think that's good for the company or our customers. That's stuffing the channels with too much, ramming too much down the customer's throat. They don't really need that. I'm going to try to aim for a 20% increase in sales because that's what we can produce. That's what creates a good upward trend, and it's good for the customers. You're insubordinate. That's insubordination.
And it's highly unlikely.
Yeah, but it's insubordination, right? That's the important thing.
Right.
That incentive structures have a moral component to it. If I give you an incentive to do something, I want you to do that. If your incentive is to maximize shareholder value before you go, right, you have almost a moral obligation to do that or resign. So what the company is saying, the board of directors or the comp committee who's giving you this compensation are saying, I want you without limitation, as long as it's legal, right, to get the stock price up as high as it can go before the day you retire. And sure enough, executives respond accordingly and do that, even if it's super bad for the company. And
so what would you replace it with?
Real measures. So I distinguish between two markets. The real market, where a real company produces real goods that sells them for real money to real customers and earns a real profit or a real loss, and the expectations market, which is where shareholders observe all of that going on and form expectations about what might go on in the future. Now, we've in another sport that's near and dear to my heart, NFL football and professional sports and amateur sports in combination, there's also a real market. So NFL teams go out on a real field for a real 60 minutes and have real throws and real runs, real first downs, real field goals, real touchdowns. There's a real score and a real winner and a real loser. That's the real game. Mm-hmm. That happens on Sunday, by and large. And during the week, there's another game that's played where bettors on football form expectations of what's going to happen on Sunday. And on the basis of that, they lay down bets, and there are these friendly people in Las Vegas who create a betting line, a point spread, that evens the money on both sides. So it's whatever. It's the Rams playing the 49ers, and it's the Rams by 8 points. That's everybody's expectation of what will happen on Sunday when the Rams play the the 49ers. The Rams will win by 8 points. Half of people think they'll win by 8 or more. Half of people think they'll win by 8 or less if the Las Vegas bookies are doing their job. That's called the expectations market. So there's a real market and an expectations market in business, and there's a real market and an expectations market in football. What happens if the quarterback or the coach or the general managers of the Rams bets on that game?
Well, so in markets, you would hopefully go to jail. In the NFL, you'd be like Pete Rose, and you'd be thrown out
forever. However, what if that's the business context, and that's a member of the board of directors, a CEO, an EVP? They're applauded. Right. In fact, if you're on a board these days, you're forced to make bets on the company. So in athletics, we've realized that when you create crosshatches between the real market and the expectations market, all sorts of bad things happen. Tanking, point shaving, all sorts of bad behavior. And in business, even though the structure is exactly the same, I mean precisely exactly the same, we've decided that you must mix those two together. So,
but you can't. But there are some limitations, right? I mean, you can't go ahead and buy up your own shares before you make a major announcement. I mean, there are some limitations by the SEC about when you can buy and sell shares as an executive. But I get you. The point's well taken.
Very, very few. So they're so easy to get around.
They're easy to get around. They're limited time limits. You know a lot more than a 90-day period or whatever the washout period is, depending on the announcement.
Yeah. But in football, right? They've figured it out. They just say, that's stupid. And do you have incentives as a quarterback for beating the point spread? Like, would you write into a contract, Tom Brady's contract or Jared Goff's contract? So here's the deal: we're going to pay you an extra $5 million bonus if you beat the point spread.
Right. Well, yeah, it would never happen. Yeah.
Well, it would be, it would get both the guy who designed the contract and the guy who took it kicked out of the league for life. Yet we do that routinely in business and somehow expect that business people will not act like we worry athletes would act like. Instead, contracts in football. What are the clauses in contracts, performance clauses in contracts in football all about?
That's winning yardage, whatever they want to.
Touchdowns, sacks, number of plays, percentage of plays, number of starts, workout bonuses. They're all real things. So the answer to the question is, I would not have stock-based compensation at all, period, nada. Second choice, right, is all stock-based compensation would vest 10 years after retirement.
Oh, that's interesting. So 10 years after retirement, so not even during their tenure. So entirely based on what they've put into place, everything that they've initiated, and then that's still paying off 10 years later. That's really interesting.
This is one of the reasons, A.G. Lafley is a good friend of mine. I wrote the book with him, and he went to the board. He went to his board and said, "My compensation structure is dumb. It all vests the day I retire. I would like my stock-based compensation to vest in 10% increments at the end of each of the 10 years after my retirement." Now, that's a guy who cares about his company.
Yeah. Okay, so 10 years. Are there other things that you'd put in besides stock options vesting 10 years out?
Well, I'd try to eliminate them. I'd mainly try to figure out what is it that we are trying to accomplish. The other thing I would do is I don't believe much in monetary incentive compensation for rich people. I don't believe in it in general, right? but for rich people in particular. Like I work with CEOs all the time. Like this is one of the things I do in life. I'm an advisor to a whole bunch of CEOs, and I do not. I have not worked for one who cares about their compensation other than it being fair. They all care about being sort of taken advantage of if they're
Sure.
doing
Right. I mean, so right. By the time you're CEO of a major company, yes, they're not concerned about a little extra or a little less money.
Yeah. In fact, some of them have said to me, I don't know why the board just awarded me this new thing. All that's going to mean is that I got to spend more time with my foundation, giving them more money, and then figuring out how to not waste, have the foundation not waste it. It was literally like a bit wistful. And I said, shouldn't you? And I said, there's a real conversation. I said, well, then shouldn't you have turned it down? And he said, no, that would just create ill will with the board because they thought really long and hard about it. They had all this rationale for why this is a good thing. So I just nodded and thought, oh, well, such is life. This is true.
Such as life. Yeah. So what do you think about tying executive compensation more toward revenue or some other metric that is connected directly to the company, but separate from or largely separate from stock price?
No, that's what I mean. Real. Those are all real things. So real things are revenues, costs, customer loyalty or customer retention, market share. Those are all real things as opposed to expectations oriented things. So I would if I was going to do an incentive monetary compensation, it would be about that. But I also just wouldn't focus too much on the monetary aspects of compensation. People view other things importantly. I'll tell you a little story about when I was dean. So when I was dean at the Rockman School, when I first got there, we had not very many really good professors, world-class professors, only a handful, and no money. We were running a deficit, and our salaries were pathetically low. And one of our best three professors, probably let's say the best half dozen professors, came to me and said, I got an offer from USC. It's for $70,000 more than you're paying me. And, I'm going to have to take it unless you match. And I said to him, well, here's the deal. I've got big plans for this school. And those big plans, including making sure world-class faculty, which you're one of, earn world-class salaries. But that's going to take some time, probably 5 to 7 years, because we're in a terrible situation now, and we also have to invest in getting junior faculty to prime the pump to get things going. But we're gonna do it. We're gonna win. We're gonna be awesome, highly respected school. When we get there, I'm going to look back, and I'm going to have a set of professors who, in us accomplishing this, made my job easier, and a set of professors who made my job harder. And they will have taken actions throughout those years that will put them irrevocably in one or other of those camps. So they can't get from one camp to the other camp. They either made my job easier or harder. So I can and will, and I put the offer on the table right now. I will pay you the $70,000. I'll figure out where to get the money from and pay you the $70,000, which is probably more like $200,000 or $300,000 until I get right and get his salary up, because it's $70,000 a year for a number of years. So I will. I'll pay you that. But if I do, you will have put yourself irrevocably in the make my job harder. I won't hate you. I'll treat you nicely. But you will always, in my mind, be in the make my job harder. And if you wait, I will promise you that as soon as I can, hopefully 5 years, you will be making more than you would have made at USC, because we're aiming for a higher standard than that in salaries. And you will irrevocably be in the camp of the professors who made my job easier. And so why don't you just go away and think about it, and either all you have to do is come back and say which camp you want to be in, and we're done, and everything will be fine. Comes back a week later and says, I want to be in the made your job easier camp.
Wow, how interesting.
To modern compensation theory, right? He was willing to, screw himself for by being irrational. Hell no. What meant more to him was being part of a success, and he goes around talking about, we're now a very successful business school, thankfully, and he goes around correctly pointing out that he was helpful to that, and the dean thinks highly of him, which I do, and I will reinforce it every moment because that was super helpful to me. I used that money well to help with the turnaround. So don't overestimate monetary compensation, is my advice to anybody.
Well, yeah, because we generally, past a certain salary point, money becomes a dissatisfier and it can never be a satisfier. It acts as a very poor motivator, though if someone feels that they've been treated unjustly, it can make them, no matter what the number is, if people feel that there's been a distributive justice issue, they will be upset about
Correct.
that.
But notice how I handled it. There was a distributive injustice issue. He was worth more, and USC demonstrated a very good school with much better weather than Toronto. A very good school demonstrated that we were being unjust. But I gave him a reason that more than overcame that was non-monetary. So I'm not quite so narrowly focused on what justice is. I had to make up with love and affection what I wasn't giving in dollars. And in my view, as you get higher and higher salary, love and affection matters more than dollars. But you got to give it, and I gave it. I gave lots of love and affection to this professor. I showed him love by whenever he was interested in something, felt something was going wrong, and emailed me something. I was very responsive because he was one of my key professors. I would talk him up in speeches I gave externally as the kind of professor who represented what the Rotman School stood for, blah, blah, blah. You got to make it real, but it's not money. No money.
I want to close with one more question. I mean, this is getting to the idea about the consumer. Yeah. So, in some of your writing, various places, we've kind of walked through from the very top, looking at executive compensation, the role of the shareholder, and I want to turn to the consumer and how you think of the consumer in terms of stakeholder theory versus the traditional view that the shareholder is all that matters.
Well, the view that the shareholders only matters is just stupid. And the late Lynn Stout wrote a fantastic book on this that you should read if you have the shareholder value myth that just says it doesn't say so in the law. The duty of the directors and management of a company is to the company, not to the shareholders. And so it is to multi-stakeholders. That's ensconced definitive rejoinder to the people who will throw that shareholder value bullshit at you. It's like she's a corner. She was until she died of cancer about a year ago. It's just a definitive legal analysis that says that the argument is completely bullshit. Which that's why I'm just recommending it to somebody who's in that camp. You would love it. And so it's just, so who are these shareholders anyway, right? That's the question I ask, right? So you should be doing everything in your power to put for first and foremost, over and above everybody else, shareholders. Well, the modern shareholder, right, is actually a member of a pension fund or a investment management firm, right? State Street, Fidelity, Vanguard. These people trade your shares on a kind of daily basis. So their loyalty to you is zilch. They don't, in fact, even have to tell you why they've traded your shares or that they've traded them until 90 days afterwards. So in what way do they deserve anything? I'd ask. I mean, the people who deserve something from you are people who show you more consistent support, like your employees and like your customers. And so if you've got these transient people, now that's not the case in family-owned private companies. Right?
Sure.
Lego is one of the companies I work for, and it's owned by the Christensen family, and it has been for 4 generations. And right, the employees love them, absolutely love them, because they're wonderful people. They're wonderful, charitable people, good-hearted towards their employees, etc. And so, in that case, then you should care about the shareholders. Although in those cases, often the shareholders don't care much about themselves; they care about their employees and their customers more. But in the modern American, widely held, publicly traded company, shareholders don't demonstrate enough to have them be even at the front of the line. And I guess I just believe fundamentally in the system dynamics of this. That's best illustrated by what Robert Wood Johnson set out when he took Johnson and Johnson public. And he said, I'm paraphrasing here, customers, he called patients because they were in a healthcare company. Customers come first, employees come second, the communities in which we live and work come third, and last, he didn't say next, he said last come the shareholders. But if we do a good job with the first 3, they will earn a fair return. That's a company that went public in 1848 for, I don't know, probably a couple $100 million or something that's worth, last time I checked, about $280 billion. It works if you pay attention last to shareholders and view shareholder value as an effect, not a cause or a goal. It's just an effect of having the goal of being awesome in treating your customers, and wonderful with your employees, great with the communities in which you operate. The other thing will take care of itself. So being focused on shareholder value is a way to make sure you do not maximize shareholder value.
Yeah, it's ironic.
Yes, it is. And it's one of these sort of narrow-minded logical fallacies that I think is.
Yeah, I think the person who, in my mind, captured that really well was Steve Jobs, and just his obsession with product, experience of the product, and in the course created Apple, but the focus was always the product and making the product better.
Well, it's even better than that. Like, he showed such disdain for shareholders.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
Like, it was even better. Like, it was the home run there. It's sort of like, you're along for the ride, and again, if you just think about it too, right? The likelihood of a current shareholder of yours ever having contributed capital to the company is now infinitesimal, right?
In what way?
Well, they bought the stock from somebody who 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 bought the stock.
I mean, it's someone who was original.
From somebody who actually gave the company money 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 40 years ago. Like, we treat them as if they funded the company. But after initial sales of shares out of Treasury, they didn't fund the company. They're just betting on the company. Now, I maybe sound too negative about them. I'm glad they bet on the company and all that kind of stuff. But they should just be thankful that the company lets them free ride on their great work on behalf of customers. Not act like we gave them the money to fund this company.
Just last small question: will this be your election platform?
Never. I will never do that. I'm trying to write a book that will influence policy for the better, but that's as far as I ever want to go.
All right. On that note, I just want to thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to the podcast today. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at jeffshatten1@gmail.com. You can tweet me at jeffshatten. If you like this podcast, press the subscribe button and make sure to rate it on iTunes so that other people can find it.